What's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken and welcome back to another video. Corvus is the newest support champion in Paladins, and I have to say, I have never had more fun with a new champion in the past 2 years than the fun I've had with Corvus. Corvus has a complex but powerful kit, with extremely interesting and useful healing mechanics, a fantastic movement ability, and a powerful weapon that lets him hold his own in a fight. His ultimate is also an effective zoning tool, and everything about his design not only looks but feels fantastic. I've played Corvus non-stop since its release, and I've learned a lot on my journey to level 50. So today, I am proud to present my guide on how to play Corvus, the Magistrate's Blade. This is the most comprehensive guide I have ever released on a champion, and is filled to the brim with tips, tricks, loadouts, and advice to help you improve at this amazing champion. As with all my Season 3 guides, we'll start off with an overview of his kit, and then we'll move on to discuss loadouts, gameplay tips, talents, and more. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Alright, let's start off with an overview of his kit. His primary fire is an officer's pistol, which deals 70 damage roughly every 14th of a second, for around 1000 DPS. This is one of the best weapons in the support class, outclassing Pip, Ceres, and even Furia in terms of raw power. It works best at close to medium range, and can deal headshots for even more damage. His second ability is his Abyssal Reconstruction, which is the main way you heal people. It heals an ally for 350 health over half a second, and at the end of its duration it heals for a burst heal of 800 health. It has a cooldown of 4 seconds, which can be brought down to about 2.8 seconds with Chronos 3. This healing can be augmented and spread across multiple allies with his next ability, Mark of Fate. This ability allows him to place a mark on a teammate, with a massive range. This mark will stay on the teammate until Corvus decides to move it or the teammate dies, in which case the mark will bounce to the nearest teammate available. The mark heals the teammate for 55% of the healing done to the person you heal, and if you heal the marked target directly, your Abyssal Reconstruction will do 10% more healing. It's also helpful to note that if you heal your marked target directly, the cooldown of Abyssal Reconstruction will decrease by 1 second. Marked targets can also gain a slew of buffs from Corvus loadout cards and the Dark Gifts talent, which makes the Mark of Fate an extremely powerful ability to have. Another thing to note is that you can heal your marked target from literally across the map, as long as you have another teammate next to you. This makes it great to put on your flank champions, because you can heal them while there's several walls between you. Now, onto one of my favorite movement abilities of all time, Corvus' Projection. This ability projects a manifestation of his dagger, which pierces through all enemies and shields, though it does get blocked by Atlas' stasis field. It also slows all enemies it hits by 35%, and deals 400 damage. It stops after 150 units or if it hits a wall, whichever comes first. Then, once it's stopped moving, you can reactivate the ability to teleport to the dagger for the next 3 seconds, and if you choose not to teleport to it, then it disappears, and the cooldown is reduced by 1 second. It has an 8-second cooldown by default, though there are 2 cards in his loadout which can shorten the cooldown by different means. It's also very important to note that if you throw it and it hits a wall, the projection will actually land a short distance away from the wall, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck inside. And finally, his ultimate. This is one of the most cinematic ults in the game, and I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Corvus rises into the air, and then can slowly hover around if he chooses before casting an Abyssal Energy Zone anywhere he chooses, which slows unlucky enemies caught in it by 33% and deals damage to them based on a percentage of their health. If they're caught in the zone when the ability first goes off, they take 15% of their health as damage. Then, every half a second they sit in the zone, 6.25% of their health is taken as damage. The ability lasts for 6 seconds, and if the enemy were to sit in the zone for its entire duration, they'd take 90% of their total health as damage, no matter whether they're a tank or a flank. This makes it a very helpful zoning ultimate, since it can scare enemies off the point or wherever you choose to place it, much like the Tyra's Fire or Grumpy Bomb. Corvus' ult has another purpose though, survivability. When casting his ult, he is completely immune to crowd control and takes 60% less damage. With some good reaction time, you can completely evade risky crowd control ultimates like Ceres, Bomb Kings, Roms, or Eevees by pressing E to rise above the ults and not get stunned or trapped by them. You can also use this if you get flanked to scare the pesky flanker and survive their onslaught long enough for you to get help or kill them outright. The survivability and zoning potential of this ultimate makes it a really helpful ability to have in his kit, and it just looks so dang cool. Alright, now on to his talents. Corvus' first talent is Dark Gifts, which is an augment to his Mark of Fate that provides 15% crowd control reduction, 10% cooldown reduction, and 15% reload speed to the marked ally, and also passively heals the ally for 50 health a second. This is incredibly useful if you're playing on a team with champions like Makoa or Cassie, since the buffs can really help them out and enable some unique builds like Makoa's 0 cooldown half-shell build. However, this talent isn't as helpful with champions who don't have cooldowns like Koga, no reload like Shaolin, or crowd control immunity abilities like Inara. Still though, this is a very unique talent that opens up a lot of interesting possibilities and synergies with the different champions, and it's very fun to use in a party with friends who can benefit greatly from your buffs. Stunning Visage is the next talent you unlock, and in my opinion it's Corvus' most fun talent to use. Stunning Visage stuns any enemies who are hit by projection, and once you teleport to your projection it deals 600 damage to any enemy caught between your starting position and the teleport. This is a very powerful talent, since it basically gives you free damage if you hit the projection on someone and stun them. There are also a lot of techniques you can do with this talent to become a lethal damage Corvus player, which I'll be going over later in the video when I discuss gameplay tips. Spreading Influence is the final talent you unlock for Corvus, and it is the main healing talent you will be using the majority of the time. It decreases the percentage of healing done to marked targets by 15%, but it allows you to put 2 marks out. This lets you heal up to 3 teammates at the same time, though you won't be healing 2 of the teammates for nearly as much. There are a lot of interesting mechanics and setups you can do with this talent to maximize your healing, and I'll be going over those later in the video as well. Anyways, let's move on to loadouts. Corvus has some really interesting and unique loadout cards that can make for some quite effective and situational loadouts. Let's start off with the loadouts you'll be using the most, the healing builds. There are 3 important cards which should be in just about any Corvus loadout. Shadow Tribunal, which gives up to 10% additional healing to the marked target, Crushing Expectations, which increases the movement speed of the marked target by up to 15%, and Grand Design, which gives up to 25% lifesteal to the marked target and shares 100% of the healing done by it with Corvus. This last card is my favorite because it's just so unique and original, and it's an interesting way to heal Corvus without just a boring old I heal myself when I heal others card. Though he does have one of those too in the Price of Salvation, which is also a good card to have. These cards can be combined in a variety of ways to create some unique situational loadouts that work well with either Dark Gifts or Spreading Influence. The first version of a healing loadout I have is a good old max healing loadout, with Grand Design and Shadow Tribunal at 5 to really push Corvus' healing to the limit. It also has Crushing Expectations at 3 for some helpful movement speed, and then the Price of Salvation and Priority Targets as helpful filler cards that make Corvus a bit smoother to play. This loadout is good for when you have 2 tanks, or the enemy team has a bunch of bursty champions that you'll need to work hard to out-heal. Next we have a max speed loadout, which maxes out Crushing Expectations while slightly lowering the levels of Grand Design and Shadow Tribunal. The Price of Salvation is here again for some self-sustain, and I put Magistrate's Might in for a bit of extra tankiness. You could swap out the filler cards for ones that better fit your playstyle, but I find these cards to be extremely beneficial. This loadout is primarily for if you're on a team with champions that have no movement abilities like Tyra or Vivian, or with tanks that get slowed when they fire their weapons such as Fernando or Inara. Finally, we have the loadout that I use the most, which is the self-sustain build. This has a little bit of everything: good movement speed, good healing with Grand Design 3 and Shadow Tribunal 4, and it has Price of Salvation 4 for some immense self-heals. It also has priority targets again because it's a fun card to have. I use this loadout for most of my games as healer Corvus, and have been able to rack up some seriously massive healing numbers comparable to those of a good Ceres or Furia player. I'm able to keep myself alive fairly easily, and still support my team really well. Now, let's move on to the fun loadouts. This is the full damage build, which might look a bit strange at first glance. I have priority targets at 5, which cuts down the cooldown of projection by 2.5 seconds whenever I heal an ally. I find this to be a bit more reliable than his other card, Unyielding Discipline, since it's easier to proc priority targets because you can't miss a heal, and it also reduces the cooldown by more, since you're often only hitting one enemy with projection, which means only 1 second off the cooldown with Unyielding Discipline. Next we have Magistrate's Might at level 4 for a 520 health shield after dropping below 35% health. This card is super helpful and has saved my life several times, and it also lets me brawl a bit better with high damage champions like Cassie or Androxus. I also have Grand Design at 3, which you might be a bit confused by. But the way I see it, this is free healing for you, since you can just slap your mark on the highest damage champion on your team and let them heal you without even realizing it. I've found that this card is surprisingly effective, and it also helps you heal a teammate while you focus on fragging out. The last 2 cards are just fillers, and you can swap them out based on personal preference. But we're not done yet. There's one more intriguing build which I have that can be really, really effective, and that is the hybrid build. This loadout lets you use Stunning Visage to defend yourself from flanks and frag out whenever possible, while still healing your teammates and keeping everyone alive. This loadout has priority targets 4 for reasons we mentioned earlier, and it also has Grand Design and Shadow Tribunal at level 4 to supplement your healing. Since Corvus' base heals are so strong without a talent and really only need Chronos for you to be an effective healer, you can go for the damage talent with this build and be the most valuable asset on your team, keeping everyone alive while also protecting your backline from flanks and helping to score pivotal kills. I recommend going for this hybrid build if you have a second healer on your team who's going for a damage build, or if the enemy team has 2 flankers who you know you need to take care of and defend yourself from. The versatility in Corvus' builds are truly awesome. Okay, before we move on to the gameplay tips, let's talk about items. Obviously, with all the builds except the pure damage build, Chronos is the #1 priority. Rushing Chronos is super important, because it can help him crank out heals super quickly and also have his movement ability up more often to teleport to dying teammates or juke the enemy flankers. If you're going for a full healer build, I recommend buying Kill to Heal and any defensive items you desire after maxing Chronos. Alternatively, you could buy Morale Boost, although his ultimate charge rate is already really high, so it's not mandatory. If you're going for a damage build, Cauterize is a must, since his weapon is incredibly effective at reapplying Cauterize. You could even buy this as a healer if your team really needs it. Also, Life Rip is helpful on the damage build, since his base DPS is quite high and it gives him another form of self-heals. Also, Chronos is still a good option even on the damage build, since it lets you use your projection more often, which means you can score more kills. Now, on to the gameplay tips, of which there are many. Let's start off with the healing tips, since you'll mostly be playing Corvus as a main healer. Every time before the round begins, you should always make sure to put a marker on the teammate or teammates that you think will benefit from it the most. If you're going Dark Gifts, this should either be the person who will reap the most benefits from the buffs like Makoa, or it should be the flanker, since they'll often be out of your line of sight and will benefit immensely from your consistent healing. If you're going with Spreading Influence, then you can mark 2 teammates in spawn. I recommend marking either a flank or DPS and your tank, since you can either heal the tank directly for a significant boost to the amount of healing you do to them, or you can heal a backline champion and still give your tank some marginal heals. However, the order in which you mark these champions is important, since the first one you mark will always be the first one which the mark is taken away from. With Spreading Influence, it always takes the mark away from the person who's had it the longest when you choose to move it. So, if you mark the flank first and the tank second, that means that when you decide to move the mark once you're out of spawn, your tank will still have a mark. Because your tank will often need the majority of your healing, it's important that you make sure that the mark stays on them. You can always know who will be losing your mark next by looking at the UI. The champion on the bottom is the one who is next in line to have their mark removed. By putting marks on your teammates in spawn, you're saving crucial seconds once you're out into the fight, and you're making sure that your teammates will get reliable healing from the start. Juggling your marks is important, and you should not be afraid to move a mark off your flank or tank to a DPS who is out of line of sight if they need more healing than who your marks are currently on. Your marks serve as a powerful tool to help you reach allies who are either beyond your reach or behind walls, or both. You can mark someone from an incredibly long distance away, and its short cooldown means you can always place a mark on those furthest from you who need healing the most. Alternatively, you can move the mark onto your tank or another ally who is close to you to ensure that they're getting the most amount of healing from you if they're in grave danger. Managing marks is all about making sure the teammates in the most risk and the most danger have a mark on them so you can heal them, so you need to be focused and aware of who is taking damage on your team and where they are at all times. It's also important to remember that the cooldown of your heal is reduced by 1 second if you heal a marked target directly, so if you can safely get in line of sight with a marked ally and heal them, or if you mark someone close to you so you can have a heal on the marked target farther away, you'll end up healing them more quickly and will have a better chance of keeping them alive. I utilize this a lot when I'm healing my tank in a point fight. I usually always keep a mark on them and then heal them directly so they'll get the full effect of my heals, and each heal comes 1 second sooner, which ultimately results in a ton of healing that gives my tank the advantage they need to survive and win. Going back to what I said earlier about marking people in spawn, this is why I always mark my tank second, to ensure that I can move a mark to my other teammates if need be, while making sure that my tank will have a mark for the majority of the point fight. Properly managing Corvus' marks is key to making sure that you get the most out of Corvus' powerful healing kit. Alright, now let's talk about Corvus' teleport. This is an extremely versatile and useful movement ability that I absolutely love, but it can be tricky to master. For starters, if you're trying to escape from an enemy by throwing your dagger directly towards a ledge, chances are you're going to end up falling over the edge to your doom. I did this several times while I was starting out with Corvus, and even when I threw it at the railing, I would still fall over because the projection goes through the railing. So if you need to teleport near an edge, what I recommend doing is throwing your dagger well above the ledge, so that you still teleport over there, but you won't overshoot and fall to your death, and you can gracefully fall onto the floor. Although, if you do mess up and fall over the edge anyways, you can still use your ult to save yourself, and maybe even kill a tank or flank who is chasing you. Since this projection is a teleport, you can actually throw it through windows, doors, and other small holes that you wouldn't normally be able to fit through. This opens up an opportunity for some extremely intelligent escape routes if a flank chases you, and a smooth and flashy way to teleport to your allies if they need healing. For example, if a flanker is chasing you in the backline of Brightmarsh, you can throw your projection through the window of a side building and put a wall between you and the flanker, letting you escape and making it harder for the flank to kill you. Alternatively, you could throw it through the window of the spawn room, teleporting right into the fray where people least expect you. While this doesn't work as well against more experienced players, it can still be a fun way to escape if you're playing against less experienced individuals. You should also pay close attention to the noises going on around you and learn the maps in the game well. With sufficient map knowledge and a keen ear for enemy flankers' footsteps, you can flick to a safe spot and preemptively teleport before the flanker even sees you, bamboozling them while giving you a chance to prepare, group up, and kill the flanker. Corvus' projection is programmed to be very fluid and work well with flick shots similar to how you would play Eevee or Androxus, where you flick, dash, then flick back and shoot the guy coming after you or who you're trying to attack. With some practice, this can become almost second nature like it has for me, and it will be especially easy for you to pick up if you're experienced with flank champions like Maeve, Androxus, and Eevee. You can also utilize his projection with his ultimate in a really cool, cinematic, and effective way. You can teleport high into the sky above the objective from the backline, then activate your ult. You'll be high in the sky and will be able to place your ult pretty much anywhere, and then when you're done, you can fall back down to the ground. And on some maps like Bazaar or Fish Market, you can actually fall right back down into the safety of your backline, putting several walls between you and the closest enemy. When placing your ult, I strongly recommend using it on the objective or between the enemies and the objective, preventing them from easily reaching the point. Alternatively, you could place it directly on a champion, either an enemy sniper, a flanker coming to kill you, or the enemy tank. Most of the time, you'll want to place it on the tank, since it will ultimately deal the most damage to them. Even though his ultimate is percentage based, meaning that any champion will take the same percentage of their health as damage, those damage numbers will be higher on the tank, and thus will be harder for their healer to heal back. You can also use his ultimate to dodge any crowd control or high damage ultimate in the game. Because of the 60% damage reduction and crowd control immunity, you're almost guaranteed to live through a variety of ultimates including King Bomb, Convergence, and Cataclysm. Then you can use it to strike back on the person who ulted, saving yourself and helping protect your allies in the process. While this does take some good reaction time, with practice you can master this process and make yourself very hard to kill. Alternatively, in a fight with a flanker, you can press your ult to live through their onslaught of damage and maybe even kill them. For example, if Androxus comes behind you and starts shooting you, you can teleport to a teammate who can help you or to a safer spot away from most of the enemy team. Shoot at the Androxus to whittle down his health while he tries to figure out where he went, then when he starts shooting at you, ult to tank his shots and deal damage to him. The combined damage from your ult and your weapon will usually be enough to make him flee or kill him outright, and in the worst case scenario you will still die, but leave him too weak to fight the rest of your team, and a teammate can easily pick him off. I've employed this strategy several times in my experience playing Corvus, and it has worked wonders in keeping me alive to help my team win the game. Alright, now let's talk a bit about Damage and Hybrid Corvus. Damage Corvus is a really fun playstyle, and it is highly effective. There are quite a few tips and tricks that you should know when attempting Damage Corvus to really shine like the lethal threat you are. For starters, there are a few things that you need to know about the way Stunning Visage works. If you hit an enemy with your dagger, you will stun them for 1 second and deal 400 damage. Then you can teleport behind them, and if they're directly in the path between you and the dagger, you deal an additional 600 damage. Landing the stun almost guarantees that you'll get the 600 damage on them. Although, do you remember what I said about how the projection will land a short distance away from the wall if the wall stops it? This mechanic works on Stunning Visage in an interesting way. If an enemy is right next to the wall, you can still stun them for the 400 damage. However, because the projection goes to rest a short distance away from the wall, the enemy will be between the wall and the projection, and they will not be between you and the projection. So while you can still hit them for the 400 damage and the stun, it is impossible to hit them for the 600 damage. In this scenario, it's best not to teleport at all, because then you're just putting yourself right in the enemy's face and you'll most likely die. Instead, while they're stunned, just shoot them until they die. However, what if you miss the dagger outright and the enemy is not hugging the wall like in that scenario? Is it still possible to somehow salvage the 600 damage? Well, the answer to that is yes. Projection has a relatively small hitbox compared to the size of Corvus, and the 600 damage is done when an enemy is caught in the path between the projection and Corvus when he teleports. However, the dimensions of this path are not determined by the size of the projection, but rather the size of Corvus. So if you miss an enemy by just a little bit with a projection, you can still hit them for the 600 damage if they're close enough to the path, as shown here. If you miss the dagger completely, you can still use the 3-second teleportation window to position yourself so that the enemy will now be in the path between you and the projection, and then teleport for that sweet 600 damage. Although, projection already has a massive hitbox anyways, so you shouldn't have to worry about this too much. Now, there is a highly effective way of going about killing your foes and humiliating any flanker who comes near you. Most players, when trying out Stunning Visage, throw their dagger, then immediately teleport once the stun hits, and I used to do this too when I started out. However, this is not the best way to kill your opponent, because while you teleport, you miss out on a crucial half a second when you could be shooting the stunned enemy instead. This technique ultimately gives you less time to shoot the incapacitated enemy, and gives the enemy a greater chance to kill you instead. Instead, what you should do is stun the enemy, then immediately start shooting them and don't let up until the stun wears off. This lets you use the full second of stun time to pump at least 1000 damage into them, if you don't hit headshots. However, because they're stunned, it's very easy to single out their head and do more damage to them that way. This 1000 damage comes after the 400 damage from your dagger. Then once the stun wears off, you teleport behind them for the 600 damage from Stunning Visage. This brings their total damage to at least 2000, which is enough to kill some squishy targets. And because you're now behind the stunned, weak enemy, you've bamboozled them enough that the last few bullets you need to confirm the kill are easy to land, and you've effectively killed your opponent without taking any damage. Once you're done killing your opponent, if you use the full damage build I mentioned earlier, you should then heal one of your teammates to reduce the cooldown of your projection and prepare yourself to score the next kill. This game loop repeats until you either win or you die, and you can even revert back to healing your teammates with your mark and heal if you really need to. This is where the hybrid build comes into play. You can use Stunning Visage as a self-defense talent while still healing your teammates by buying Chronos and playing like a normal healer would. But then when someone comes to attack you, you hit them with a stun and 2000 damage before they even know what hit them. So if you have a second healer on your team or you're playing a team deathmatch, you should go for either hybrid or full damage build because it is so highly effective. Of course, you might be wondering, what happens if the enemy buys Resilience? In that case, the playstyle still works like normal. You stun them, shoot them, then teleport behind them immediately once the stun wears off. However, it just becomes slightly riskier since you've got an increased window of time where the enemy can shoot you, so you've got to be consistent with landing your shots and hitting headshots. In my experience with using Stunning Visage, Resilience doesn't hurt the playstyle too much since you're still doing a ton of damage to the enemy. There are still a few other things to note about his damage playstyle though. You can throw his projection through shields like Khans and Fernando's to deal 400 damage and leave them vulnerable to fire from the rest of your teammates because your stun takes their shield down. A stunning blow like that can be lethal for them, and can secure your team a major advantage in a point fight. Also, if you throw your dagger to stun someone and it lands in a spot where multiple enemy champions could shoot you and kill you, do not teleport to it. While you'll still get the 600 damage and possibly kill the enemy you're targeting, there's a great chance you'll die from teleporting to a bad position. You only want to teleport to deal the 600 damage if you know that teleporting is safe. The same goes for throwing your teleport at an enemy and it going over the edge, unless you have an ult which you can use to save yourself and keep the cycle of death rolling. Anyways, that's my ultimate guide on how to play Corvus, the Magistrate's Blade. Did this video help you improve with this fun and unique champion? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. Also, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload from me, and share this video with your friends if you think they could benefit from this guide. I also have a Discord server linked in the description which you can join to pick up tips, leave suggestions, and become a part of our active community. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.